Hi, my name is Evelyn Stone, and I'm 52 years old. I've never had a grand title or a famous last name. I wasn't born into money or married into it. I've lived quietly, worked steadily, and paid my bills on time. I raised my son alone after his father left when he was 6. I never asked for sympathy, just a little respect. But apparently, even that was too much to expect from the woman he married. The first time she looked at me, I could feel it. That tight, judgmental smile that said, "This woman isn't worth my time." Her name is Collie, my daughter-in-law. Blonde hair always styled, designer purse always in reach, and a voice as sharp as her heels. When they got engaged, I welcomed her. I baked. I babysat her dog. I offered to help with the wedding. But I was too old-fashioned, she said. Too much, she said. You don't have to pretend to be involved. So I stopped pretending. I took a step back. I smiled when I saw her and stayed quiet when I didn't. And when my son started visiting less, I didn't ask why. I already knew. But it was last Christmas that truly broke something in me. I'd spent the morning alone, made a little roast, wrapped a few presents for the grandkids, and waited. At 3 p.m., I texted, "Everything okay?" At 5:12, my son replied, "Sorry, Collie's mom surprised us with a brunch. We'll stop by tomorrow." They never did. A week later, I overheard a voicemail on speakerphone. Collie talking to a friend, laughing. "Ugh, we were supposed to see his mom that day, but she lives in that depressing rental, and I just couldn't do it. I swear. She's going to die poor and alone with that ugly front porch and all those ceramic frogs." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there. My son tried to explain. She was joking. "Mom, she didn't mean it like that." But she did. She meant every word. I could see it in her eyes the next time she smiled at me. That smug, icy kind of smile. And something inside me shifted. That day, I decided I would never let her define me again. Not by my zip code. Not by my bank account. And definitely not by her twisted idea of what I deserved. She thought I was just a little old lady renting a sad house on the edge of town. But what she didn't know was that I'd been quietly investing. 4 years, bonds, stocks, a little crypto, nothing flashy, just slow, steady patience. And while she was buying handbags, I was buying shares. While she was hosting Pinterest perfect dinner parties, I was taking financial literacy courses online. She saw a poor woman in a rental. But what she didn't see, what no one saw, was the plan I'd been building for nearly a decade. A plan with her name on it. Not for vengeance, exactly. Not yet. But that would come. Oh, it would come. I started small at first, almost like a test. Looked up listings, drove around neighborhoods they'd never even glance at, and quietly noted what was undervalued and what had potential. I didn't say a word to anyone, not even my closest friend Bernice, who's been my neighbor for nearly 10 years. I just watched and waited. 6 months after that Christmas voicemail, I made my first purchase. A small duplex 2 blocks from where my son and Collie had just refinanced their massive new home. I paid in full. No mortgage. No announcements. No ribbon cutting or bragging online. Just a silent transaction filed under a name they wouldn't recognize. And then another property, and another. Slowly turning that little seed of humiliation into something real, something solid. Something that couldn't be laughed at. But the part that still makes me smile, truly smile, happened 2 years later. When I got a knock on the door from my son, he looked tired, worn down in a way I hadn't seen before, and behind him, Collie stood clutching a folder, visibly agitated. "Mom, do you know anyone who owns property near Brookridge?" he asked. I blinked. "A few people do." "Why?" Collie jumped in. "Our landlord sold the house. We have 60 days to find a new place, and the market is a nightmare. But there's a small rental nearby that might work. It's in our kids' school district, and it's newly renovated. But no name, just a private owner." I nodded slowly, heart beating a little faster. "What's the address?" They told me, and I nearly laughed, because it was mine, every square inch of it, including the stainless steel appliances she would later rave about on her Pinterest page. But I didn't let on. I just smiled and said, "That sounds promising." The next day I called my property manager and said, "Approve them, but raise the rent a little, just enough." And when the paperwork came through and Collie saw the name on the ownership line, she blinked 3 times, then asked, "Who is ES Holdings?" My son shrugged. I just poured myself some tea and said, "Must be someone smart." She didn't laugh then, not even a smirk. The lease was signed within days, and soon I watched them move in. Collie stood on the curb giving directions while movers hauled in boxes of monogram pillows and trendy bar stools. I stayed out of sight but not out of reach. Every little issue they had, whether it was the dripping faucet or the heating panel blinking, I knew about it before they even called, and I made sure my property manager responded quickly, politely, but never with urgency. She wasn't rude, just efficient in a way that made it clear they were tenants, not royalty. It was subtle, but I could tell it started to wear on Collie. She wasn't used to being the one who waited, who knocked, who asked twice, and one afternoon, I saw her outside, staring at the front hedge like it had personally offended her. Her tone with the gardener was clipped. Her hair wasn't curled that day, and the expression on her face reminded me of that Christmas voicemail, the same twist in her mouth, the same careless cruelty, only now the power was gone. It was just a performance without an audience. I remember thinking, "You have no idea whose house you're standing in," and something about that made my tea taste better that night. A few weeks later she called me, directly, voice tight and sweet. "Evelyn, do you know any landscapers in the area? Our landlord's taking forever to respond." I smiled into the phone. "That's strange. They usually reply quickly. But let me see what I can do." She thanked me like she hated it. I could hear it in her breath. And that was the moment I realized I didn't need to fight her anymore. She was already losing to someone she couldn't even name. And the best part, my son had no clue either. He just assumed I was being helpful. Kind old mom, connecting them with services like I always did. He never asked why I suddenly knew so much about the rental market, or why I could quote school zoning boundaries like a real estate agent. He was too distracted juggling their finances, because as it turned out, their big house plans didn't work out after all refinancing fell through. The buyer backed out, and now they were stuck in a house I owned, paying me rent every single month. And I never raised my voice, never slammed a door. I simply waited. And now, the joke they made about me dying poor and alone, it echoes differently now, because I'm not poor. And I'm certainly not alone, not when I hold the keys to everything they thought they were too good for. I didn't need revenge that screamed. I just needed the kind that lingered, the kind that stayed quiet while it rewrote the story they told about me. And that's exactly what I did. Because the truth is, I never wanted to take anything from them. I just wanted what I gave all those years. Dignity, consideration, a place at the table. And when they made it clear I didn't belong at theirs, I built my own and made sure they'd need a seat eventually. It's been almost a year since they moved into my house. They still don't know, and I don't plan on telling them. Not yet, maybe not ever, because every month, when that rent payment hits my account, I remember her voice on that voicemail, her laugh, her cruelty, and it doesn't sting anymore. It empowers me. I water my plants. I clean my porch. I wave to the kids on their way to school, and sometimes I sit with Bernice and sip lemonade, while Collie struggles with her Wi-Fi connection across the street. I'm not cruel. I still send cookies with the kids on holidays. I still ask how they're doing. And if something breaks in the house, I make sure it's fixed within a week. I'm not a monster, I'm a mother, a landlord, and a woman who learned that just because someone underestimates you doesn't mean you have to live down to it. You rise, you watch, and when the moment is right, you let them walk into the home they thought was theirs, only to realize they never even read the fine print. I never meant to keep growing the portfolio. Not at first. It started with that one property, the one they moved into, and I told myself that was enough. But once you taste a certain kind of quiet power, it changes you, not in a cruel way, but in a clear way. You stop apologizing for being smart, for being underestimated, for being overlooked so long that you learn how to move in silence. So when a duplex went up for sale 3 blocks away, I didn't hesitate. I ran the numbers, made the offer, and closed within a week. I didn't even tell Bernice this time. Just signed the papers, checked the roof myself, and had the place painted sage green with white trim. Simple, clean, intentional. Then I sat on the porch and listened to Collie screaming at the internet company over the phone, her voice echoing through the street like she still believed the world owed her perfection. And I thought to myself, what would she do if she found out I owned half this neighborhood? I don't think she'd believe it, not really, because in her eyes, I'm still just the woman who wore knockoff shoes to her baby shower and brought homemade soap instead of a registry gift. I remember her pulling my son aside that day, whispering, "She's sweet, but it's giving thrift store energy," and him laughing like he didn't owe me his entire childhood. But I didn't snap. I didn't correct her. I just added a note to my journal that night. Never again feel small around someone. With no depth. And that note turned into a list. And the list turned into plans. And the plans started to move faster than I expected. By spring, I owned 4 properties within a half-mile radius, and not one person suspected a thing. I kept the name Generikis Holdings and paid in full every time. I chose my tenants carefully. Working couples, quiet retirees, single moms with jobs and ambition. I wasn't just building equity. I was building something else. Something they would feel but never see coming. And that's when it happened, the invitation. It came in a cream envelope with gold lettering, addressed to Ms. Evelyn Stone. And inside was a card that read, "You are cordially invited to the Brookridge Homeowners Gala." And in the corner, scribbled in black ink, was Collie's handwriting. "We'd love to have you join us this year. Everyone's asking about you." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I called Bernice and asked her to come by. I made us coffee, laid the invitation on the table, and said, "You remember when she said I'd rot in that rental? Bernice nodded slowly, her eyes wide, and I whispered, "Well, this year I'll be toasting champagne across the ballroom from her, and she still won't know she's paying for the heating system I just replaced." I didn't buy a new dress. I wore the navy one from my cousin's wedding. Classic, elegant, with a neckline just high enough to make people guess what I was thinking. I kept the jewelry simple gold hoops, same ones Collie once mocked for being so basic, and pulled my hair into a soft twist under my olive cap. I knew people would talk. That's what these neighborhood galas were for. The glittering performance of wealth, status, and subtle cruelty. But I didn't come to impress. I came to observe. The ballroom was dripping in white orchids and too much candlelight. Soft jazz floated through the air like everyone had secrets they wanted others to envy. I walked in alone, smiled at the greeter, and headed straight for the bar not to drink, but to anchor myself. That's when I saw them, my son and Collie, in matching outfits like they were running for office. She was laughing too loud, leaning into conversations like they belonged to her, and when her eyes landed on me, she froze just for a second, then smiled like she hadn't once wished me dead. In a voicemail, "Evelyn, you came," she beamed, like this was all her idea, like she deserved credit for my presence. I nodded, wouldn't miss it. She introduced me to a group of women mothers of classmates, wives of realtors, someone's sister-in-law who ran a wellness blog, and I watched them all assess me in an instant. My shoes, my skin, my tone. One of them asked, "So what do you do?" And I replied gently, "A little of everything." Collie jumped in too quickly. "She's retired, but she's so good at keeping busy, you know." And everyone laughed politely, like I was a hobby, like I was some sweet ornament in her curated world. But I didn't flinch. I just smiled and sipped my ginger ale, because I knew something no one at that table did. That the venue they were standing in, the one Collie had gushed about renting because of the chandeliers and the old money vibes, I was one of its silent owners. Bought a 12% stake through a trust the year prior when the owners ran into debt and needed quick capital. They kept the name. I kept my name off everything. And now every time someone books this place, I get a cut. So while Collie bragged about how connected she was with the event manager, I raised my glass and thought, connected enough to pay me without knowing it. The rest of the evening was a study in restraint. I moved from table to table, speaking softly, listening more. And when the conversation shifted toward property values and rising rents in Brookridge, I felt the familiar hum beneath my skin. One of the women mentioned how hard it was to find decent tenants who wouldn't ruin the hedges. And Collie chimed in without a pause. "Our landlord is so out of touch, probably some old guy with no idea how to manage anything." She said it like a joke, but her voice held bitterness. And I let her talk, let her laugh, even as I felt the irony coil around the stem of my wine glass. She didn't see it, not yet, and part of me wondered if she ever would. At one point I passed by the event coordinator near the kitchen, a young woman named Mia who I'd met once during a site meeting for the venue's board. She spotted me, smiled wide, and said, "Miss Stone, everything okay?" Loud enough for the people around me to hear. I just nodded and whispered, "Lovely as always." But I could feel Collie watching from the bar, her smile faltering for half a second like she'd caught a detail that didn't quite make sense. Later that night, when I slipped away early and walked down the curved stone steps outside, I looked back once and saw them through the arched windows, Collie flipping her hair at someone, my son scrolling his phone, and I realized how much space I'd reclaimed just by refusing to shrink. The next morning, Bernice came over with scones and a smirk. "So, Did she catch on? I shook my head. Not yet, and we laughed the kind of quiet, satisfied laugh only women our age know how to do. Because we've lived enough years to know that truth doesn't always need an audience, it just needs time and a little patience. That weekend I went over my accounts again and noticed something curious. One of the tenants in the duplex had broken their lease early. Apparently the wife had taken a job out of state, and the second unit was about to sit empty. I didn't stress. I had options. I always had options now. But then I got a call I wasn't expecting. It was my son, voice hesitant. Hey, Mom. Random question. Would you happen to know if that duplex on Garden Way is still available? Our lease is ending soon, and the owner's raising rent again. I nearly dropped my coffee. The duplex, my duplex, and the lease, mine too. I cleared my throat and said, I might know someone. Let me check. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, fingers still curled around the handle of my coffee cup, thinking about how full circle everything had become. The woman who laughed at my rented porch now unknowingly asking for space in a property with my name on the deed. I called my property manager and said, we'll accept them, but month to month only, and don't waive the pet deposit this time. I wasn't being vindictive, just thorough. When my son called back to say they'd apply, I told him, tell them to list both names on the application this time. It's better for legal clarity. He didn't even question it, just said, thanks, Mom. We really appreciate it. And I hung up slowly, letting the weight of those words settle into the room like warm sunlight. That weekend they came to see the place, Scully in dark sunglasses, trying to look unimpressed, walking through the kitchen with her phone out like she was already planning what to complain about. But I could see the change in her, just a flicker, something small. She didn't know I was the owner yet, but she felt something. Maybe in the way the air didn't bend to her the way she expected. Maybe in the way the property manager didn't rush, didn't flatter, didn't make her feel like the star of her own little show. I watched from inside my car down the street, sipping a ginger soda and smiling like a woman who'd finally learned how to build her peace with bricks no one else thought she could afford. Later that night, Bernice asked me, do you think you'll ever tell them? And I shook my head. Why would I? They're finally learning to live within something they didn't control. That's enough. And for the first time in years, I slept with the windows open. No alarms. No replaying old words in my head. Just breeze, just quiet. Just the steady breath of a woman who rose exactly the way they never saw coming. Three weeks after they moved into the duplex, I got a letter in the mail that didn't make sense at first. It was from the county assessor's office, a routine notice about updated property records. But stapled to the back was a copy of a form I hadn't seen before, and there, clear as day, was Colley's signature, shaky and rushed, next to mine, where the lease agreement had been updated for administrative review. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because something about seeing her name beside mine in legal ink felt heavier than I expected, like proof that the balance had shifted and the universe had filed it away. That same day, my son called, nervous, awkward. Hey Mom, Colley has a weird question. She wanted to know if you used to work in real estate. My heart didn't race. I just smiled and said, I've worked near it. Why? He hesitated. She said the signature on the lease looked like yours. And she remembered that time you helped the Johnsons sell their condo. And I told her no. But he trailed off. I let the silence sit before answering. Tell her I've signed a lot of things in my life. Doesn't mean they were all houses. He chuckled like it was nothing. But I knew it wasn't nothing to her. Collie was the kind of woman who didn't stop when her gut twitched. She prodded. She Googled. She asked around. So I checked every listing, every mailbox, every online record tied to East Holdings and made sure they were sealed tight. No trail to my name. No photographs. Just layers of shell ownership and old PO boxes that led nowhere fast. Still, she kept poking. And one afternoon I saw her talking to the gardener, the same one who'd worked my yard before the hedge got replaced. She smiled too wide, asked too many questions, and later that night Bernice said, Your girl's getting close. I shrugged. Let her. Because here's the thing about women like Collie. They think they're playing chess when really, they're flipping checkers off the board and calling it strategy. The real game is patience. And I've had decades more practice than she has. It wasn't long before the questions got bolder. I caught Collie snooping around the trash bins on collection day, probably hoping to find a receipt or envelope with a name that didn't match her assumptions. I almost wanted to walk out there and hand her one with a bow, but I didn't, because silence was still the sharpest knife I had. A few days later, my property manager forwarded me an email from her, polite on the surface but barbed underneath, just wondering if the owner would be open to selling the unit. We'd love to build equity and stay long-term. I read it 3 times before responding myself, not from my Evelyn email, but through the East Holdings address. Short and formal. At this time, the property is not for sale. Thank you for your interest. The next morning I spotted her sitting in her car with the engine running, just parked there, staring at the mailbox, like she thought the answers were inside it. And maybe they were, but not in the way she expected. Bernice came by that afternoon with blueberry muffins and asked, Is it bad I'm enjoying this? I laughed. Only if you call it revenge. I call it realignment. She raised an eyebrow. Sounds more like real estate karma, and I had to admit, I liked the sound of that. But then things took a strange turn. My son stopped by unannounced, a rare thing, and he looked nervous, hands in pockets, pacing like he used to when he broke something as a kid. Mom, I need to ask you something weird. I waited, quiet. Did you ever own property under someone else's name? That made me pause, not because of the question but because of how carefully he was asking it. I played dumb. Like what? A timeshare scam? He sighed. No, like Collie found some stuff online. She's been digging. I don't even know what she's looking for anymore. I tilted my head. And what are you looking for? He blinked. The truth. And for the first time, I saw it. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was starting to doubt her, not me. And that shifted something deep in my ribs. I looked him in the eye and said, Sometimes the truth is too expensive to own, even when you're finally ready for it. A few days after that conversation with my son, I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. Someone had tampered with the mailbox lock at one of my smaller properties, and another tenant mentioned a nosy blonde woman asking if the unit was up for sale. I didn't need a photo to know who it was. Collie was unraveling, not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet, frantic way that happens when someone realizes the ladder they've been climbing wasn't even theirs to begin with. The next Sunday, I invited them both over for lunch, something I hadn't done in months. I made lemon chicken and roasted vegetables. Nothing fancy, just comfort food. They arrived late. Collie in a stiff blouse and too much perfume. My son already. Half apologizing for something she hadn't said yet, she tried to act sweet. Complimented the curtains. Mentioned how cute the place was for a rental, and I just smiled. "It's mine," I said, calm as anything. She blinked. "You mean you own it?" I nodded. "This house, and the one before it, and the duplex, and the event venue where you hosted that gala last fall." Silence stretched across the table like a dropped plate. My son stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Collie opened her mouth twice before anything came out. "But why didn't you say anything?" And I could have answered that question 1,000 ways with a lesson, a warning, a jab, but instead I simply said, "Because I didn't need to." She looked down at her fork, jaw tightening, and for the first time in years, she had nothing to say. No snide remark, no condescending joke, just silence. And that silence was everything I had waited for. Later that night, I stood at the sink doing dishes and watching them pull out of the driveway. Collie gripping the steering wheel, my son glancing back at the porch, and I thought about how many times I'd felt invisible in their lives, how many dinners I'd been left out of, how many milestones they'd passed without thinking of me. But now, I wasn't just visible, I was immovable, and they knew it. But what I didn't expect came the next morning. A letter slipped under my door, not typed, not formal, just handwritten in rushed, defensive pen. It was from Collie, and it read, "I don't know what your game is, but I don't appreciate being lied to. If you wanted control, you got it. Just don't expect respect to come with it." I read it twice, then folded it once and placed it in my drawer, not because it hurt, but because it proved everything I already knew. She never saw me as a person, only a prop in the narrative she built around herself. And now that the prop was standing upright, she didn't know what to do with it. I didn't respond to her note, not out of pettiness, but because I knew there was nothing I could write that would matter to someone who'd already decided silence was hostility, not wisdom. So I let her sit in her own discomfort, let her replay her choices while trying to pretend she still had control. But control doesn't come from shouting or accusing, it comes from owning something so thoroughly no one can take it from you. The following week, I had lunch with a local developer friend, and over coffee, he mentioned offhandedly that Collie had approached him with questions about forming an LLC. "She's fishing," he said, "wants to know how people hide property from in-laws." I laughed into my cup, not because it was funny, but because of how transparent she'd become. Every move she made was now rooted in fear, not of me, but of being outplayed by someone she thought would always stay beneath her. And that fear was guiding her right into places she couldn't navigate. And sure enough, a few days later I got another letter. This one more desperate, shorter, written in slanted handwriting like she was shaking when she wrote it. "If you want something, just say it. You've proven your point. I get it now." I folded that one too, slipped it into the same drawer with the first, not because I was collecting her shame, but because I wanted to remember what it looked like when someone finally saw me clearly. That weekend, my son came over alone. No heads up. Just knocked and stood there on the porch like a boy again. He looked tired, older than he should have. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I made a mistake." I didn't ask which one. I just stepped aside and let him in. We didn't talk about money or houses or signatures. We talked about peace and roots. and how silence can be a gift if you use it to build, not punish. And when he left that night, he hugged me longer than he had in years. And for the first time, I didn't feel like someone chasing respect. I felt like someone who had owned it all along. It had been nearly 2 months since the last letter, and I thought maybe she'd finally run out of ways to twist the silence into blame. But then the doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and there she stood, Kali, alone. No makeup, no sunglasses, no performance, just her, holding something in her hands like a peace offering. It was a pie, badly wrapped in foil, peach maybe, or apple. I didn't comment on it. Just opened the door and stepped aside. "You have 5 minutes," I said. She didn't flinch, didn't fake a smile, just nodded and walked in. She sat at the edge of the couch like she was expecting a courtroom, and I stayed standing, letting her speak first. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. "I thought you were weak because you didn't fight back. Because you didn't argue when we excluded you." She paused. "But now I see you didn't have to." I didn't respond, just waited, because I wasn't here to offer her relief. I was here to witness her reckon with herself. She took a breath. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want you to think I wasn't aware." And for a moment, I believed her, maybe not fully. Maybe not forever, but enough to see that something had shifted. She stood up, set the pie on the table, and turned to leave. No tears, no plea, just quiet. But before she reached the door, I said, "Kali," and she stopped. "There's a key under the 3rd brick by the back gate. If anything ever happens, if you're in real trouble, use it." She stared at me like she didn't know whether it was a trap or a grace, and maybe it was both. But she nodded once and walked out, and when the door closed behind her, I sat down and finally let myself exhale, not out of relief, but out of release, because the story she wrote for me had ended, and the one I wrote for myself had already begun years ago. The one where I stopped proving and started living. Where I turned insults into income, silence into structure, and bitterness into bricks. The one where I remembered I was never a side character, I was the foundation. The weeks after that were quiet in a way that felt intentional, not like distance, but like space. Like the first clear breath after you've been underwater too long. I saw less of Kali and more of my son, and though he never brought her up, I could feel the tension in his shoulders slowly unwinding, like he was remembering how to be someone separate from her. One Sunday, he helped me fix the broken fence post in the backyard, and while we worked, he asked, "Do you think people can really change?" I didn't answer right away because I knew he wasn't talking about people, he was talking about her, and maybe a little about himself. I finally said, "People don't change just because they see the truth. They change when the lie stops working." He nodded slowly and went back to hammering. And in that moment I felt like a mother again, not a figure on the sidelines, but someone who could still shape the way. He moved through the world. Later that week I met with my lawyer to finalize the trust. Everything I owned would be distributed carefully, deliberately. No surprises, and no second chances for those who gambled on my silence. When she saw the name on the trust, Kali's name listed for a small provision, my lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" I nodded. It's not for her. It's for him. So he never has to wonder what side I stood on. And that was true. I wasn't rewarding her. I was removing her last excuse to ever claim she'd been cut out unfairly, because that's how people like her survive, not with truth, but with a story that makes them the victim. And I was done giving her anything to twist. A few days later, I hosted a neighborhood dinner in my garden. Nothing extravagant, just good food, soft lights, and chairs filled with people who saw me. Truly saw me. Someone mentioned the property taxes going up and asked if I was worried. I smiled and said, "Worried? No. I'm insured in full and my rentals cover every penny." Someone else said, "Wait, you own more than one?" And I just gave a small nod and let the silence do the rest, because now the quiet wasn't armor. It was legacy, and I didn't need applause to know I'd built something unshakable. It wasn't until early autumn that I saw her again, really. Saw her not in passing or from behind a curtain, but face to face. She showed up at the community fundraiser I'd helped organize, wearing a navy blazer to sizes too stiff and a smile that looked stapled on. She didn't approach me right away. Instead, circled the edges of the event like someone looking for a reason to be noticed but not sure what to say when they were. Eventually, she wandered over to the table where I stood arranging name tags. I looked up and said, "You made it," like she was just another neighbor, and maybe in that moment, that's all she was. She nodded. "I heard you were chairing this," and I smiled. "I chair a lot more than people realize." I offered her a name tag, but she waved it off. "I'm not staying long." I didn't try to keep her. Didn't offer warmth I didn't feel, because pretending would have made me the woman she used to think I was desperate for scraps of approval. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the music faded, I saw her watching me from across the lawn, not angrily, not even bitterly, just confused, like she was trying to figure out when exactly the power had changed hands, and how she hadn't noticed. The truth is, she never had the power, not real power, just the illusion of it. Loud enough to fill a room, shallow enough to vanish once you stopped needing permission to belong. A few days later, I got a message from her, short and oddly gentle. "I think we both underestimated you. I hope he's proud to have you as his mother." I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about what came next, about what I was building now that all the noise had gone quiet. I spent the following week finalizing the sale of my smallest property and investing in something new, a community center space, one with room for workshops, counseling, mentorship programs for women like me, women who'd been written off, dismissed, underestimated, women who'd been told their worth expired when their voices got quieter. The first class we hosted was a financial literacy course for single women over 50. And as I stood in front of them explaining equity, rental strategy, and silent ownership, I saw myself in every one of their eyes, not the woman who had to prove she was smart enough, strong enough, valuable enough, but the one who already was. By winter, everything had changed, and yet nothing had. I still had my morning tea in the same chair, still walked past the same mailbox, still folded laundry by the back window while the neighborhood dogs barked like clockwork. But something inside me had shifted permanently, not like a scream, but like a locked door finally easing open. People started calling me ma'am more often, not out of age, but respect, and I let them. I'd earned every syllable. My son stopped tiptoeing. He visited freely, laughed louder, and once, while helping me unpack a new rug, he said, "You know, I used to think you were just nice." And I raised an eyebrow. "You say that like it's an insult." He grinned. "No, I just didn't know nice could look like this. And that moment meant more than anything Kali ever said or didn't say. Because the truth was, I never needed her to see me. I needed him to remember who I was before she told him otherwise. As for Kali, she stayed quiet after the last message. Not a word, not a knock, not even a glance when we crossed paths in town. And that silence told me she'd finally realized there was no comeback, no angle, no leverage to dangle in front of me. Because the story she tried to write, the one where I was a fragile, forgotten, pitiful woman wasting away in a rental, had burned to ash the moment she signed a lease with my name on the deed. And that's what I carry with me now. Not spite, not even satisfaction, but truth. Truth that smells like fresh paint in properties with my signature on the title. Truth that moves through new tenants who know their landlord is a woman who answers to no one. Truth that feels like keys in my palm, not just to houses, but to rooms where women like me were never supposed to sit at the table, let alone own. The building. The last time I saw Kali up close was at a grocery store. She didn't notice me at first, fumbling through coupons, looking tired in a way no amount of money could cover. And when she finally looked up and saw me, she froze. I could see the debate flash across her face, acknowledge me or not, and I just gave her the smallest, calmest smile. Not cruel, not smug, just real, because I didn't need revenge anymore. I had results. I had receipts. I had rentals. I had roots. And most of all, I had rebuilt my life so thoroughly that even her absence couldn't touch it. When I walked away that day, I realized something I hadn't before. Maybe she had tried to bury me, but she'd done it without realizing. I was a seed, and now, with every lease signed and every lock turned, I bloomed.